and how atmospheric perspective is working inside of it. You can see, basically, we want our far background buildings to match this. There's not a lot of contrast, and also the way atmospheric perspective works is the further away something gets from us, the more it takes on the color of the horizon. So this color right here, you can see it's a lot more present in these background colors. And if we wanted to push something further back, we would just kind of add that color in. And you can see how that just pushes it further away from us. So what I want to do, now that we have our lighting direction, our levels are pretty close, I want to start with our deep background. And I want to get that matching our plate. And then from there, we'll work our way forward. So I'm going to go to our levels checker again. Let's just check our shadows. And you can see the shadows are a little too prominent in this whole back skyline. So I'm going to go in here and I'll create a levels, and I'm going to call it Atmo. And let's just lift this. And I'm just going to duplicate that to my other deep background group. Now let's check our highlights. You can see they're way too bright here. I'm looking at this this background building over here. So that's the point in which the highlights disappear. Keep it right around there. Play it up a little bit because I do want to have some prominent highlights in the background. And that's starting to match. The only other thing I might do is just bring in a little more of that horizon color. So I'll just fill the whole layer with that and switch this over to color. And I'm just going to tone down the opacity. I don't want it all monochrome. I just want a little more of that color. And I'll do a little gradient too, so that it's picking up a bit of that top color into the horizon color. And I'll just duplicate this over. That's starting to look nice. Probably bring in the mid-tones just a little bit, bring those up. This isn't based on anything. This is just, by eye, thinking, I want it just a little brighter. And then another thing we can do is we can add a little like fog in here. And I'll just grab that background color again. And this is just to separate these buildings just a little bit, give it more depth. And I'm going to add a little bit of that flare on that top right building. Set this to soft light. I'll just hit a couple of these just to give it a little light direction. Cool. And then we'll go to our background layer. Actually, I'll show our midground too. So now that we do have a levels adjustment that hits the atmosphere pretty well, and everything's closely balanced together, I can duplicate that over and just adjust the opacity, just using the number keys. I'm just gonna give it a little separation. And bring the highlights up a little bit more. Now we have a strong highlight on these buildings. It's actually a lot stronger than the plate because I do want to play up that directional light a lot more and do less backlit but more side lit. So one of the things I'm going to do is pump up the highlights in the background and the deep background. Right now this is just a little too flat for the rest of our buildings, so I'm going to go back to the deep background, and I'm just going to grab this whole group and merge it. And I'm going to take down Control U for hue saturation. And I'm not doing this in levels adjustments because it's just not worth it time-wise for these sorts of things. So I'm going to take out all the saturation. I'm going to go to blending options, and I'm going to just blend just the highlights in here. And I can pump the highlights up, give them a little color. You can see what that's doing. It's a little too drastic right now, but I'll just create a layer mask, empty it, and now I can paint in where I want those highlights in that deep background. And you can always create just another layer and paint them in. And this is the stuff that you can spend forever tweaking. So I'm not gonna make it all perfect now, but I'll just get a little close, little hint of light in there. Normally I would go through the whole background and do that. I'll just hit a couple buildings for now, but just so you understand the idea. And you can always just tone down the opacity to blend it in. But even something as simple as just a couple lines there just brings it together a lot more. Cool. Let's keep going with our background, getting that atmosphere in there. I'm just going to duplicate this Atmo layer. And just tone down the opacity as it gets closer to us. Looks like a couple of these layers might have gotten shifted. I'll check that out later. Oh, you know what? It's my plate that got shifted. There we go. That's why it's important too to extend to the bottom. I just took shortcuts over here. But I mean, other than making a mistake of shifting the plate, but also if you do move around areas and you get those holes, it would have taken me a couple more minutes to just extend that down to the bottom and to be able to move those wherever I wanted. You know, I did that with a lot of the buildings, but there's a couple that I just slipped on. Some buildings like this one right here still isn't really fitting in, so I'll just go in and paint some atmosphere. And maybe pump up the highlights a little bit. That's fine for now. I'm not going to go into too much detail. Another thing with atmosphere, you can always set it to lighten, so you can keep your highlights and just affect your shadows. Cool. So now that I have like the background and the deep background, the atmosphere blocked in, the way I'm going to check the atmosphere is with that levels checker. And as I pull the highlights up, everything furthest away from us should disappear first. And as the buildings come closer to us, the shadows are darker, so they'll disappear last. So I can see here that, you know, I have a bit of an issue with this building. So I'll just create a lighten layer. I'll grab the shadow, one of the shadow colors from behind it. And now that disappears at the right time. And some of these you can see should actually be darker, like this mid-ground building. And this building up here as well. A couple of our mid-ground buildings actually could be a lot darker. But that's kind of the push and pull when you're doing this stuff, is just as you add in more and more elements or color corrections, you start to see how the puzzle pieces fit together, and then you're just working back and forth. That's starting to work nice. That kind of gives us a good base for atmosphere, and then we can always go in and add more where we want to just by painting atmosphere in. Put this on the background. Wherever we need more separation, we can add an Atmo layer. Like I think, you know, between these buildings maybe, so we'll just add another atmosphere layer in here. We can kind of do that throughout. That's this kind of like city fog. You know, I think over here is a good opportunity for it. I don't want to overdo it, so I'm just going to lower the opacity a little bit throughout. And we can also add those little sun flares. And that'll help it quite a bit. That deep background, there's still some things that are bugging me with it. So I'm just gonna push a couple things further back. And maybe add a little more of that warm flare to it. couple last color corrections, just as I'm seeing the atmosphere playing in and seeing how the colors are starting to work together, finding different areas that we can improve the colors on. And I think this is at a good place for us to compare with our sketch, see how we've done. So I feel like we nailed it in terms of getting those buildings in there and getting that that composition. There's a couple things where I wanted more light on the left side, so I might go in here and in my atmosphere layer, just add in a little more brightness in there. And maybe overall in that deep background, we can have a little more separation. And I think that's at a good point to go in and start addressing these bridges. I think that's going to help a lot. It's going to give a lot more visual interest and help guide your eye a bit more. So that's what I will go and do next.